Good morning and welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Ladi Akiriduluale. The headlines. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky pledges to retake lost territory, including the city of Lysychansk, after Russia claims full control of the eastern Luhansk region. Delegations from Ukraine, donor countries and civil society groups gather in Lugano, Switzerland for the Ukraine Recovery Conference. And Belarusian leader Alexander Lukashenko says his country stands with the Russia in Ukraine campaign. President Volodymyr Zelensky has acknowledged that his country's forces have withdrawn from Lysychansk in Donbass. However, he vows to restore control over the area thanks to the army's tactics and the prospect of new improved weaponry. Mr. Zelensky, speaking in his nightly video address, said that if the commanders of the army withdraw people from certain points at the front where the enemy has the greatest advantage in firepower, and this also applies to Lysychansk, it means only one thing, that they will return thanks to tactics and increase in the supply of modern weapons. Russia said its capture of Lysychansk less than a week after taking neighboring Severodonetsk gave it full control of Luhansk, a political win that meets a key Kremlin war goal. The battlefield focus now shifts to the neighboring Donetsk province, which together with Luhansk makes up what is known as the Donbass region.
Russia has enough Smerk, Uragan, ground systems to destroy city after city in Ukraine. Now they have gathered most of their firepower in Donbass, and they can use tens of thousands of artillery shells every day on one section of the front. This is the reality. Therefore, we destroy the potential of the occupiers day after day, calculatedly, powerfully, and of course, the HIMARS system we received and other weapons from partners play an important role in this. The fact that we protect the lives of our soldiers, our people, plays an equally important role. We will rebuild the walls, we will win back the land, and people must be protected above all else. And if the commanders of our army recall people from certain points of the front where the enemy has the greatest fire advantage, in particular, this also applies to Lysychansk, it means only one thing, that we will return thanks to our tactics, thanks to the increase in the supply of modern weapons.
Meanwhile, 6 people have been killed in Slavyansk after the eastern Ukrainian city was hit by powerful shelling from Russian multiple rocket launchers. Local officials there say the attack is the worst shelling to hit the frontline city recently and caused nearly 15 fires. The city is in the industrial Donetsk region that Russia is trying to capture. Donetsk Regional Administration spokeswoman Tatiana Hidnachenko told Ukraine's public news network that 15 people had also been wounded in that attack. She says that the neighboring city of Kramatorsk had been hit by MLRS fire, destroying a hotel. The mayor of Kramatorsk also wrote on Facebook yesterday evening that the city had once again been hit with what appeared to be MLRS fire. And the Russian military has confirmed it has taken control of the Ukrainian city of Lysychansk. Earlier, Russia's defense minister Sergei Shoigu said his forces had captured the city and had taken full control of the Luhansk region.
The so-called victory for Russia began on Saturday, when Russian armed forces claimed they had encircled the strategic city of Lysychansk in the Luhansk People's Republic, while Ukraine said it still had control over the city and that fighting was continuing there. Luhansk militia forces say Russian troops and militia members on Saturday entered the center of Lysychansk with video footage showing the city's administrative building under the control of Russian and Luhansk militia forces. Sources cited by Russian state news agency TASS said the Russian military and Luhansk militia forces had already controlled all major strategic positions around Lysychansk and completely encircled the city.
the armed forces of the Russian Federation.
By Sunday, Russia's defense minister said forces had captured the city and taken full control of Luhansk. Ukrainian troops were said to have been outgunned there. Its general staff said that in order to preserve the lives of Ukrainian defenders, a decision was made to withdraw. It said the Russians had multiple advantages in artillery, aircraft, manpower, and other forces. Meanwhile, Russia's defense ministry spokesman, Igor Konashenkov, has accused Ukraine of targeting civilians in the city of Belgorod, which he said was hit by missile strikes early on Sunday. At least 3 people were killed and dozens of homes damaged by blasts in the city. The governor reported several explosions in the city of nearly 400,000, some 40 kilometers north of the border with Ukraine. At least 11 apartment buildings and 39 houses were damaged, including 5 that were destroyed. The exiled mayor of the southern city of Melitopol said the Ukrainian forces hit a Russian base with over 30 strikes, and Russia confirmed it. Its news agency RIA News reported that Ukraine had hit the Evyamistechko area of Melitopol, where the city's airport is located, but did not specify what had been hit. In another development, Turkish customs authorities detained a Russian cargo ship carrying grain, which Ukraine says was stolen. Ukraine had previously asked Turkey to detain the Russian-flagged Zibek Zoli cargo ship. A Russian government airplane carrying diplomats expelled by the Bulgarian government took off from Sofia to Moscow on Sunday evening, ahead of the deadline for them to leave the country. 2 planes were set to transport 70 Russian diplomatic staff and their families from Bulgaria on Sunday, after the government earlier ordered them to leave. Finally, Australia's Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has promised his country will provide Ukraine with additional military equipment, including 14 APCs, 20 Bushmaster vehicles and drones. He made the pledge during his meeting with President Volodymyr Zelensky in Kyiv, in addition to more sanctions on Russia.
Let's talk now to security expert, military analyst, and former chief of Nigeria's Defense Research and Development, retired Major General Henry Ayolai, who is in our Abuja studios. Good morning to you, General. Thank you for your time this morning.
Good morning, Ladi. Thank you for having me. Good morning, viewers.
This is a big blow to the Ukrainians. There's no sugarcoating that, because the Russians now have the whole of that region in their grasp, and even by the admission of the Ukrainian president, the Ukrainian forces are outgunned, or they were outgunned in there and had to beat a withdrawal. But how much of a problem is this for the Ukrainians, given the overall position of the war in Ukraine?
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, there are many ways to look at this. I'll look at it from the side of Russia. I would say, of course, it's a major victory for them, in the sense that we know that the Donbas region has been one of their main military objectives, which, of course, is a limited objective, which I said before, the first time we discussed this, I said it that I would advise that Russia should select some limited objective, which, of course, the eastern side of Ukraine, where they have their kith and kin, has been one of the, of course, the basic reasons they gave for even starting the so-called special military operations. Okay, so it's a major victory for them. And, of course, looking at it from the Ukrainian side, yeah, why? Maybe for the sake of propaganda, some of them may want to make it look like it's not a serious setback. But we know that, again, I advised before, too, that left for me, I would have advised President Zelensky to just let go that side of the country. Because even as it were, the sovereignty of this nation had been sabotaged based on the restlessness and restiveness in that part of the country. And something must give, you know. So it could be a very good area to negotiate and bring this whole destruction to an end. Because, I mean, I'm so concerned about how does Ukraine get restored and rebuilt after this whole huge destruction going on. And I see it as like a deliberate ploy of Russia to actually punish Ukraine. But if it is just to fulfill or achieve their strategic goals, it doesn't have to be this destructive. And so you could see a whole lot of artillery bombardment, air bombardment, missile bombardment, all of this happening. It's like wanting to drive the point home that, look, this is the punishment you will get if you try this again. So, but again, even if I look at it at the neutral side, yes, one major victory does not necessarily translate to victory of the world. Victory in the battle and engagement is not necessarily, equal to victory in the war. Because sometimes you can have victory in one battle, one engagement or the other, and the war still goes on because, there's still other areas, other theaters in the war, other areas to capture and so on. So I think it's a good point for both sides to think of a diplomatic way of resolving the issue. Thank you very much.
Given that scenario, of course, we are hearing from some of Ukraine's backers that it is not yet time for peace talks, and they are undertaking to arm Ukraine even more. But they are hampered by the fact that none of these partners is prepared to cross the line that Russia drew in the sand at the start of this conflict, which is that if Ukraine were to be given any offensive weapons, the country supplying such weapons would be deemed an enemy and a co-combatant in this war. And all the Western countries have tried to avoid that. In fact, they're very insistent on avoiding that in spite of the pleas of the Ukrainian president, continuous pleas that more weapons, more sophisticated weapons, weapons with longer ranges should be supplied. Now, if this continues to be the situation, yes, one victory or one battle victory does not mean you've won the war, but are we then just postponing the inevitable, especially when you talk about the amount of destruction that is going on?
Yeah, thank you very much. That's a very tricky one. If you look at it, I would say that part of the Russian threat, ab initio, is something you can call an empty threat because it's obviously not a credible threat. Because of course there have been weapons streaming in from different Western countries, including America. In fact, to the extent that just last week, America again promised giving the national, automated surface-to-air missile system that America really holds very jealously, because that's what they use to cover both the White House and the Pentagon. So it's not usually one of those kind of platforms that they want to give to other nations. But they've pledged that, and work has started in Senate. And of course, there have been all kinds of platforms sent from different parts of members of NATO and other Western European countries. If I was looking at the list of different military aids coming from the different countries, members of NATO in particular, and I see that America is, of course, number one, with a wide gap between the second, which is UK. I mean, while America has put in so far about $25 billion, the UK just put in about $2.5 billion. So you can see the gap. And then, of course, you find, interestingly, Poland coming before Germany. And also, of course, all of these are going on. I'm sure Russia is not thinking that it's going to now join, them in the war. I mean, that's why I say it's an empty threat. But of course, I mean, some threats are credible, some are empty threats. But that will continue. Of course, I mean, that's the minimum that NATO owes Ukraine, because it's more or less like they put them into this trouble. So at least they have to be seen to show that support. So I don't think that is going to stop any day. Of course, we see in the midst of that other countries within the European setting too, who, well, for their own enlightened self-interest and the best interest of their national security and all of that. Especially when you think of the issue of the strategic importance of Russia in the area of energy, the politics of energy. Of course, each nation will chart a course that is in the best interest of his own national interest. Okay, so you see that also going on. We see recently we see the president of Indonesia visiting. We see the president of Belarus even telling Russia to be prepared to use their nuke. Of course, I mean, that's just to show support, because you don't have to tell them for that. In fact, from the beginning of this war, Russia had actually lowered its alert state and its requirement before the use of nuclear weapons. So all of that was set, and those are part of the very tricky areas that had to, to be watched from the beginning. All of this reminds me of the Cuban Missile Crisis and how America handled it. How did then, President John K. Kennedy, was the president at the time, and of course on the Soviet Union side you had the Nikita Khrushchev, and how eventually it was still a diplomatic solution that brought that crisis to an end after 13 days of serious brainstorming and all of that. And it was simple. Nobody lost face. So, both sides were, the conditions were, sufficiently face-saving that nobody felt humiliated or sovereignty had been injured in any way. And it was simple. It was simple for America to say, okay, we make a promise that we will not attack Cuba, and then we remove the missiles in Turkey, which were the two conditions that the Soviet Union gave. Of course, Soviet Union removed the missiles, and we had peace. And the world breathed a sigh of relief for what appeared to be high tension that was going to lead to nuclear clash. Okay, so that's why I think that this is a good point. And maybe if there are people that Zelensky listens to, they should tell him, that, look, this is a good point to think again, because the damage to his nation is so huge. And the reconstruction and rehabilitation will take several years. Of course, I know you may still get help from the same Western countries, but it's better now than later. That's my advice. Thank you.
I can't let you go, and I'll expect your answer in about a minute or so. Militarily now, Russia in control of eastern Ukraine, most of eastern Ukraine now. But then on the other hand, you have two countries that were previously neutral on another side of its border. I'm talking about Sweden and Finland now joining NATO. So did it militarily, did it score itself an own goal by going into Ukraine, even if it comes out victorious?
Yes, in fact, thank you very much. That just buttresses the point I made earlier, that nations will weigh their options, their strategic options. And they are not going to say just because Russia said this, then they will not do that which is in their best interest. Of course, Finland and Norway that joined, yeah, they will have weighed their options. They were also virtually in the same place where Ukraine was. Maybe the only reason why they were not attacked concurrently with Ukraine, maybe other factors. Because again, we know that the affinity between Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus as the original Slavic states will also be one of the things that underscored why Russia will feel as aggravated as they are towards Russia, and not the same feeling towards the other surrounding 14 nations who are actually rooting to join NATO. So, well, everybody will count his cost and his loss at the end of the day, but at least maybe Russia had made a point. In deterrence and compellence, you want to show credibility of, the threat of punishment. And I think that's perhaps what Russia will have achieved. Of course, they have their own casualties to deal with too. They have their own destructions and losses to deal with too. Yeah, thank you very much.
Indeed, indeed. Major General Henry Ayola, as usual, thank you for your time and for your perspective this morning. We look forward to having you again soon.
Thank you very much.
Coming up after the break, Russia adds multiple agricultural products to the list of exports to be paid with rubles. Please stay on with us. Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back. Security preparations are underway in Lugano, Switzerland, ahead of the Ukraine Recovery Conference that starts today. Leaders from dozens of countries and international organizations will discuss the post-war reconstruction of the war-torn country. The president of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, said on Friday that EU membership is within reach for Ukraine. The conference discussions will focus on rebuilding and development, as well as on contributions from international partners. Countries plan to hash out what they term as a Marshall Plan to rebuild the war-ravaged Ukraine. It's planned to take place over 2 days, with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky expected to take part virtually. The two-day conference had been planned well before Russia launched its full-scale invasion on February the 24th and had originally been slated to discuss reforms in Ukraine. But once the Russian bombs began to fall, it was repurposed to focus on reconstruction. In the meantime, Britain is making preparations as it will host the Ukraine Recovery Conference next year, focused on helping Ukraine recover from the damage caused by Russia's invasion. Meanwhile, the European Investment Bank is proposing a funding structure previously used during the COVID-19 pandemic to help rebuild Ukraine with up to 100 billion euros of investment. And that's according to the reports. Citing an official document, the EU-Ukraine Gateway Trust Fund would seek to have an initial 20 billion euros in contributions from the European Union countries and the EU budget in the form of grants, loans, and guarantees. The guarantees in particular would have a multiplier effect, leading to infrastructure projects totaling some 100 billion euros, about half of Ukraine's more immediate needs. And the president of Belarus, Kremlin leader Vladimir Putin's closest ally, has said his ex-Soviet state stood fully behind Russia in its military drive in Ukraine as part of its long-standing commitment to a union state with Moscow. Alexander Lukashenko, in power since 1994 and accused in the West of human rights abuses, has allowed Russian troops to use his country's territory in invading Ukraine. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said the Belarusian leader's statement amounted to a signal with his actions to be watched carefully. Some Ukrainian officials suggest Belarus could soon become directly involved in the conflict. Addressing a ceremony marking the anniversary of the World War II liberation of Minsk by Soviet troops, Mr. Lukashenko said he had thrown his weight behind Mr. Putin's campaign against Ukraine from the very first day in late February. Belarus has been committed to a union state with Russia since the mid-1990s, but little progress has been made on implementing the plan. And in the past year, Mr. Lukashenko had insisted that his country must retain its sovereignty. He has, however, become increasingly dependent on the Kremlin, since with Russian support and a security crackdown, he contained mass protests by demonstrators accusing him of rigging his re-election in the year 2020. Germany says it is discussing security guarantees for Ukraine with its allies in preparation for a time after the war. But this will not be the same as for a member of the Transatlantic Alliance and NATO. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, who took office in December, has faced accusations at home and abroad of failing to show a leadership in the Ukraine crisis and failing to convey empathy for citizens struggling with soaring inflation that it has helped to fuel. But the Social Democrat Chancellor, whose mechanical style of communication has earned him the nickname Scholzomat, said he did not want to be one of those politicians who each week makes a promise but then doesn't keep 90% of them. Thousands of people packed central Tbilisi yesterday evening in a strong show of support for a path for Georgia towards accession to the European Union and NATO. People waved EU and Ukraine flags in a peaceful rally in the city's center. In June, the European Union's executive had recommended that Ukraine and Moldova become candidates for membership, a milestone in their potential path from ex-Soviet republics to developed economies in the world's largest trading bloc. The Commission put conditions on Georgia's aspiration for membership candidacy, including electoral and judicial reforms and progress on media freedom. Russia fought a brief war with Georgia in the year 2008 and maintains a military presence in two disputed regions of the country.
People here are gathered, civic society rally in support of Euro integration. As you know, we have filed for the candidacy of European Union. We urged and forced our government to file the candidacy. And general sentiment in the public is that the acting government is against the will of Georgian people, against the measured will of Georgian people.
This evening, as the last few ones, are the chance for us to protest against the slowing down our course to Europe, because we are creating the movement home to Europe because we are naturally part of it, so we really want to be integrated.
I am, as a citizen of Georgia, stand here with my fellow citizens, and I believe that our efforts will prevail and Georgia will be part of the EU and NATO.
Pope Francis has again prayed for peace in Ukraine during his weekly Angelus at the Vatican. Speaking to the faithful in St. Peter's Square, the Catholic Church head says the world needs peace, not a peace based on the balance of arms or on mutual fear. Since the Russian invasion in February, the 85-year-old pontiff has repeatedly condemned the conflict and called for peace.
Continuiamo a pregare per la pace in Ucraina.
Let's continue to pray for peace in Ukraine and throughout the world. I appeal to the leaders of nations and international organizations to take action against the tendency to accentuate conflict and confrontation. The world needs peace, not a peace based on the balance of arms or mutual fear. No, that does not work. That is going back in time by 70 years. The crisis in Ukraine should have been, but if you want it, could still become a challenge for the wise statesman, capable of building through dialogue a better world for new generations. With God's help, this is always possible. But we need to move from political, economic, and military power strategies to a global peace project. No to a world divided between conflicting powers. Yes to a world united between peoples and civilizations that respect each other.
Sì a un mondo unito tra popoli e civiltà che si rispettano.
And as the Pope calls for peace, the United States says it believes it is not yet time for peace talks. According to the National Security Council Coordinator for Strategic Communications, John Kirby, Washington believes it's too early to discuss peace with Moscow since neither side is ready for such negotiations. During an interview, when asked whether U.S. President Joe Biden should push Russia and Ukraine towards peace talk, Mr. Kirby said instead it was time for the U.S. to continue to support Ukraine, as Washington's goal is to make sure Kiev gets to determine how victory is decided in the ongoing conflict and on what terms. He adds that the U.S. does not want to see Ukraine defeated by Russia, and that is why they continue to rush aid and assistance. The U.S. alone has allocated already $7 billion in aid and assistance to Ukraine. And Russia launched bus services between the Crimean city of Simferopol and the Russian-controlled territories in Ukraine. For the first time in 8 years since the Russian annexation of the peninsula, a bus service between Crimea and Russian-controlled Kherson, Melitopol, and Berdyansk was launched. The cities were captured in recent months in the course of what Moscow calls a special military operation starting on February the 24th. Kherson, a port city on the Black Sea, sits just northwest of the Russian-annexed Crimean Peninsula. It was occupied during the first week of Russia's military intervention in Ukraine. The Moscow-imposed military-civilian administration in the Kherson region had said that it had begun preparations for a referendum on formally joining Russia. And residents in Kharkiv gathered to clean up their environs after multiple Russian rockets hit. Head of the Kharkiv Regional Military Administration said one of the rockets hit the yard between a school and some private houses. Armed with brooms, nail guns, and shovels, residents were seen shoveling earth back into a large crater created by the strike, while others were sweeping broken window glass from the floors inside the school and surrounding houses. The locals were busy fixing roofs and sweeping soot off the facade of the district's school. The strikes that began on Tuesday, June the 21st, were the worst for weeks in an area where normal life had been returning since Ukraine pushed Moscow's forces back in May. Kharkiv has suffered heavy bombardment from the very start of the invasion, which left much of the city of 1.5 million a wasteland of ruined buildings and debris. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has praised Israel's High Court after it rejected a government cap on the number of Ukrainian refugees fleeing the war who are allowed to enter that country. The court had said Interior Minister Ayelet Shaked could not restrict the number of non-Jewish refugees fleeing the Russian war to just 5,000, rejecting the reasoning behind the policy. Thousands of Ukrainians have come to Israel in the wake of Russia's February invasion of their country. Under existing regulations, Ukrainians do not need a visa for a visit of up to 3 months in Israel. But in March, Shaked said Israel would allow some 20,000 Ukrainians who are on tourist visas or in the country illegally before the Russian invasion to remain. She also said Israel would grant visas to a further 5,000 refugees who do not automatically qualify for immigration to Israel under the law of return, which allows anyone who has a Jewish parent or grandparent to receive Israeli citizenship. And Russia makes a massive oil discovery. That's the Russian oil company Rosneft has announced the discovery of a huge oil deposit in the Pechora Sea containing an estimated 82 million tons of oil. According to the company's statement, the field was discovered thanks to a drilling campaign in the Mediesko-Varandiev area. During tests, a free flow of oil was obtained with a maximum flow rate of 220 cubic meters a day. And that's according to the company report. Rosneft noted that the exploration works in the waters of the Pechora Sea proved that significant oil potentials of the Chimen-Pechora province on the shelf and became the basis for continuing the study and development of the region. The company reportedly controls a total of 28 offshore licenses in the Arctic, 8 of them in the area. Let's talk to Laddie Williams now of our business desk, as we do usually at this time on the program. Good morning, Laddie.
Good morning.
Pleasant Monday to you. Let's start off with this whole issue of the extra demand that Russia is placing. And that would be that, in the first place, the Bank of Russia is ready to legitimize crypto mining. Right. What does that mean?
So, you know, we've had this debate for a while now globally about crypto mining. You know, some countries are against it, you know, saying that they don't want to encourage, you know, cryptocurrency adoption in the economies because we know there will be a disruption, you know, if that is actually allowed. But now we're seeing Russia, because of the sanctions, you know, that have been leveled on Russia with the invasion in Ukraine, we've seen them try to soften their stance, you know, when it comes to crypto mining. But there's a caveat there. They don't want it sold in the country. They want the miners to sell whatever they get outside the country. And obviously, they don't want their financial, you know, system disrupted, you know, with the use of cryptocurrency. They're trying to discourage that, but they're willing to allow the miners actually sell it out there and bring in, you know, the fiat into the country. And at the end of the day, we know the miners want to be able to also, you know, sell within the country. So they're still having that back and forth. But at the end of the day, they're trying to see how they can, you know, bypass these sanctions, you know, using cryptocurrency. But they will only allow that for international payment.
So that if there are disruptions, it will happen outside.
Outside their shores, not within.
That's something interesting. But again, Russia is coming up with new, I don't know what to call them, economic measures. Because here you have wheat prices going way up.
Yeah.
Ukraine is a producer of wheat.
Right.
But it hasn't been able to export it because of the blockade.
Yes.
There are accusations that Russia is taking it from the regions it has already seized. But the prices are could go up.
Yeah.
Even further than they have already gone.
Exactly. Because
by as much as 24%.
Right. And we're seeing that happen, already with bread prices here in Africa. We're seeing most, North African countries suffer, because of their rising subsidy costs.
And they have potential for social upheaval.
And there's more coming. There's more pain with the Food and Agriculture Organization actually saying that if there's a full blockade on Ukraine's exports of agricultural products like wheat, the prices will go even higher. And if Russia continues to get out about just 50% at the level it's doing, that will also, raise the prices. So at the end of the day, we know these two countries are heavyweights when it comes to agricultural exports. And what we're seeing with these supply disruptions when it comes to global agricultural produce, obviously we're already seeing the impact, globally. We're seeing rising food prices. Some people can't afford bread at this point. We're seeing how much
and that's a staple in many countries, including particularly here in Africa.
Here in Africa too, and with rising energy prices too, that's also exacerbating the rising prices when it comes to most
which
of
is something
staples.
Again we are also seeing here.
Yes.
Prices of aviation fuel, of diesel, of kerosene, virtually everything.
Everything, and we've seen bakers actually complain, and at the end of the day, they have to pass on most of this cost. And obviously, the government already have their hands full. Subsidizing bread is not what we're looking for.
It's highly unlikely to become policy
in this climate. But we're already seeing that happen in North African countries. And we're seeing how much pressure that's putting on their bill, their subsidy bill at this point, talking about Egypt. By the end of the day, the FOA is warning that if this continues, we'll see more.
We'll see more pain, higher prices.
More pain.
Now, Germany, talking about more pain.
Right.
Germany has recorded its first trade deficit since 1991.
Exactly. In Europe, we're just seeing a lot of records being broken at this point, from a new 40-year high for inflation to first rate hikes in many years.
Many
years. We're seeing the German economy record its first month-on-month trade deficit. And a trade deficit happens when your imports actually exceed your exports. And that's quite new for Germany because they're an export dependent economy.
Indeed. So this is not just a statistic, it's real trouble.
Exactly, it's real trouble. And obviously we're seeing that from, supply chain disruptions happening because of this war. And analysts were actually expecting the trade to have a surplus. They were expecting that their sales outside would get at about 0.7% higher. But now they saw a decline of 0.5%. It was unprecedented. They didn't see that coming. And for a country that's, export dependent, this spells trouble for the country at this point. And at the end of the day, we're seeing the war continue. We're seeing more, supply chain disruptions at this point. So now they have to find a way
around this, as if they didn't have enough already.
Enough problems. They still have gas issues, trying to
figure out. And winter is coming.
And winter is coming.
I was speaking to someone late last week who said, look, forget all what you're hearing now. If by the end of October,
right,
this war in Ukraine is not over, then what Europe is going to be faced with is something on a completely different
level. Something we've not seen before. And at the end of the day, it's happening. It's already unraveling, right before our eyes. So we're seeing the German government do all it can to, at this point, to not pass on, the rising energy costs to customers. We're seeing them scampering, trying to find out how to buffer, German citizens from most of these rising prices. But it's going to be a difficult one for them, the outlook at this point. And economists already are trying to, see how they can actually, come up with policies that can actually help them. But they're seeing that right now they have a tough choice to make, at this point. So
between the devil and the deep blue sea.
So they have to get more exports out.
Definitely out. To get them to markets, possibly markets they hadn't considered before.
Right.
Now, what are markets looking like? I mean, given all the background we've just talked about, what are markets looking like on this Monday?
The markets, talking about global equities, are still in bear territory at this point. But the last week, it wasn't so bad. We saw a couple of greens, in the U.S., with the NASDAQ closing in the green, the Dow Jones Industrial Average, all of them in the green, and also in parts of Europe, too. It was quite mixed, talking about equities. at the end of the day, equities are still being hammered, at this point. But most analysts are trying to look for that bottom. Is the bottom in yet? That's the question on everybody's.
Or do we still have some way to go?
Or do we still have more pain? Because it's pain everywhere, at this point. So this week, market investors are bracing for the employment numbers from the U.S. If it doesn't meet expectations, we're going to see markets actually impacted by that. We're already seeing
they'll react very badly.
Yeah, we're already seeing a decoupling from the crypto market and the U.S. NASDAQ at this point. The Bitcoin right now is not looking so good, still struggling to stay above 20,000. It's about 19,000. So, and
each time you say this, the people I know who invested in Bitcoin, goes out to them.
Yes, it's not an easy time in any market right now, except maybe you were trading in the oil market, then you'll be smiling at this point.
At this point, of course. I mean, if you own a few tankers, who knew? Who knew?
Yeah.
Larry Williams, thank you so much for that. There will, of course, a lot more that will be unpacked on Business Morning right after this show, and then Business Incorporated later on in the day. But still to come, International Olympic Committee to triple fund established for Ukraine. Please stay on with us. Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back. Now, one of the stories being reported as a consequence of the war in Ukraine is the issue of non-recognition of medical certificates issued by its universities to students from other parts of the world, including Nigeria. In Nigeria, the Medical and Dental Council of Nigeria, the regulatory authority for the medical field, has said that from this year onwards, the degrees and certifications from universities and higher institutions in Ukraine would no longer be recognized because part of that training has taken place virtually. Now, what are the implications of this, and what is the situation elsewhere? Let's talk to Dr. Monique Gasper, who is, of course, a general practitioner joining us from the British capital, London. Good morning to you, Dr. Gasper. Thank you for your time. It's been tough to establish the connections this morning, but thank God we eventually did. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, and glad to be with you again.
Let's quickly go through this. Of course, I'm sure you've heard about this beat of not particularly cheering news about what's going to happen with students coming out of Ukraine who are struggling to complete their medical studies in various places. And even online. What do you make of it, just as a policy?
I think we all know that Ukraine has been one of the preferred destinations for international students, especially to pursue their medical degree course. And this is because of the educational quality in Ukraine, as well as the facilities that they have, the faculty and the infrastructure, which is also heavily subsidized by the Ukrainian government. So what this means is that their students are getting very quality education at minimum cost compared to other European countries. And I think the question to ask is, if any of our friends or family told us they were going to study medicine or dentistry in Ukraine a year or two ago, it would have been a case of celebration and joy. So what's different now? It's just because of the Ukraine war. But Europe and the UK is very much behind the Ukrainian students and helping them as best as possible to carry on their studies. Medicine has come a long way. Once upon a time, when I trained, there wasn't anything like virtual courses or virtual learning. Now, my day-to-day is going to be 90%, if not more than that, virtual, seeing patients, treating, managing cases. I'm not saying that there's no place for face-to-face anymore, but we can combine both to support these students to finish their training.
Given that, and I take it that means that in the United Kingdom, the people who are affected by this in Ukraine, students who find themselves or who are from the United Kingdom or who have relocated there, will have their certifications recognized in the UK because the UK recognizes what is going on in Ukraine. And as you said, technology has moved on so far from when everything had to be face-to-face.
Yes, the UK recognizes the Ukrainian medical degree. The UK from time has always implemented the IELTS, which is the English Language Proficiency Exam, as well as the PLAB, which is the also a linguistics and assessment exam for all foreign medical graduates, especially that are not trained within the EU. So that has always happened. The GMC, which is the regulatory body, recognizes the Ukrainian degree, but the Ukrainian students, like students from Nigeria, students from Ghana, the Ivory Coast, different parts of the world, would still have to take the IELTS and the PLAB exams, parts 1 and 2, which will enable them to be registered with the GMC, and so they can practice in the UK. That hasn't changed. In 2024, these exams are changing to the UK MLA, and this is going to apply to all graduates that have not graduated in the UK. But this was already in the pipelines way before the war started in Ukraine.
I must also ask, though, that it does appear that Nigeria is not alone in this way of looking at things. And unfortunately, the students are in the middle. In the run-up to this, I was reading that, for example, India also has, although a different stipulation, that if you go abroad to get a medical degree, you have to complete it in one institution, regardless of the circumstances. Otherwise, that certification would not be recognized back in India. I just use that as an example, but what would you advise the students who are caught up in all of this? We've had some of them on this program who have said, look, we can't even get our transcripts to be able to effect the transfer. The university is insisting that classes are still ongoing online, and therefore we can finish. But of what use is finishing if our certification is not going to be recognized, particularly if we want to come back home and practice?
Yes, classes are still ongoing online, and the Medical School Councils in the UK has pledged its support to all the Ukrainian medical students. They're in talks with the different bodies in the UK how best to support. One of this is by providing them access to electronic facilities where they can have their training, which most of the medical students qualifying within the last 5 years will tell you that has been extremely helpful to them. One of them is speaking clinically, which has been operationed and has been developed over the last 20 years, and are real-life videos of real-life patients talking about their conditions in real time. But the design is in the detail. We mustn't and we can't penalize the medical students in Ukraine for this dire situation that Ukraine and the whole world, for that matter, finds itself. Different countries can put in place measures where Ukraine graduates can have a year, for instance. I mean, this is just my opinion, have a year to acclimatize to their host country, a bit of an equivalent to doing UMSLE for the US or doing PLAB for the UK, or they can also carry on in Ukraine, finish their primary qualification, start a postgraduate qualification, which is more recognized internationally if they're worried about the training facilities at this level just because of the war. So I think for the students, the whole world for that, I think we just need to stay calm. You know, there's enough uproar with the war and the consequences of the war, and this is part of it. But we can't take away the future of these young people at the same time, just because of situations that may not happen. So we need to encourage them. We need to provide whatever facilities within Nigeria, if they wish to return home, or any other country they wish to go to, for them to complete their education rather than exclude them completely. It will take a lot. There may be some rehabilitation needed. They've just come from the middle of the war zone. Some of them were running for their lives without anything, but that doesn't mean that they're not qualified, and they will be an asset to the host country. That's my opinion.
Indeed. We're going to stay with this, Dr. Mudi Gasper. For the meantime, thank you for your time. We'll have you back soon on the show. Thank you so much for your time, and more importantly, for your patience this morning.
Thank you very much. Have a good morning.
And just before we go, one more story. International Olympic Committee President Thomas Bach says the organization will ensure that Ukrainian athletes will compete at the 2024 Games despite the Russian invasion. Mr. Bach was speaking during a visit to Kiev to meet Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, where he pledged to increase the amount of IOC funding for athletes from the war-torn nation. Mr. Zelensky welcomes the additional support while claiming that 89 athletes and coaches have died as a result of hostilities and 13 were captured and are in Russian captivity. And that's how we wrap up this morning's show. Thanks for being with us. My name is Ladi Akiriduluale. There'll be an update within the world today at 5 o'clock. But for now, do have a good Monday and a great week ahead. Good morning.